What goes into building a proper top spec race bike? Well, a lot more than you could actually imagine. We've come down to Moto Rapido Ducati to find out just what goes into building their British Superbike and how much effort and time it takes to run it throughout a year. Let's go and have a little look. So we're down here at Moto Rapido Ducati, and here we have Wilf, the team principal for the Oxford Racing Moto Rapido Ducati. Now this is their Ducati V4R. So for starters, just how different is this to a standard bike that you could go and buy from out in your showroom?
It's probably easier to say what is the same rather than what isn't, because in superbike racing we can adapt a lot of things to make the bike just for the track. But BSB regulations are pretty well controlled, so things like the engine, the motor, almost all of the engine is the same as a V4R road bike, but the handling, the brakes, all the suspension components, all that gets upgraded. And the big thing in BSB is electronics. So the term electronics is a bit odd because we have hours and hours of electronics work to do on this bike, but we don't have rider aids. So when we say there's no electronics in BSB, we mean there's no traction control, no anti-wheelie, no launch control, no whole shot devices.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of electronics involved. So we have a control ECU, and it's up to the teams individually to populate that ECU with all the fuel tables, ignition tables, ride-by-wire maps, engine braking maps, all that stuff. So there's a lot of work goes into that.
So we're pretty lucky here because we know that you do a lot of that work yourself. And there's so much that goes in behind the scenes of that. We hear a lot about there being like no electronics on these big 230, 220 horsepower beasts. Like, how much truth is there behind that? How do you dial this bike in so that Tommy can easily ride it around a roller coaster like Alton Park?
Well, they're not easy. As we focus the bike more and more towards the lap time, then the bike becomes more and more focused. So they become a bit harder to ride. If you and I jumped on this bike, then particularly me, then I'd probably struggle to ride it. They're really hard work to ride because we're trying to get every little bit out of it. But there are things we can do for Tommy. We spend a lot of time with suspension, of course, K-Tech on our superbike. But even electronically, we can alter the power characteristics quite a bit. The bike in the wet, for example, has a much softer power delivery than in the dry. You'd never be able to use it. We spend a lot of time measuring power. So we measure power on the dyno, and we spend a lot of time working out how much power you can get onto the track at any point in the lap. So our job is Tommy rides the bike as hard as he can. We come back, he tells us where it's hard, where it's easy, where it isn't, and then we have to adjust everything accordingly.
And when you say about spending hours and hours doing it, like how long do you spend in front of a laptop to get this bike to perform round, say you had, because you've got such a condensed season this year.
Yeah.
How long would it take for you to actually get a decent setting for Tommy to feel slightly comfortable and be able to make it work?
Well, all pre-season, all this winter actually, we've been working on all the data from last year, which wasn't our strongest year, but 19 was, so we've got good data to compare. And we come up with a good testing plan. Now, testing this year was all about just getting the bike as a base setting. So we've got this go-to, there it is, that feels like my bike. And you'll notice in testing now we do much longer runs, much longer number of laps at one time. So the more time he gets on the bike, more feels like his bike. And then we have to tweak it from there.
From the outside, it looks fairly similar to what you've been running since Ducati brought out the V4R. Like, how much does it change year on year? How different is this bike now for the start of the season as it was at the back end of last season?
Well, this year we've got a slightly different fork from K-Tech. So we spent the winter working with K-Tech just to solve a few problems. We've got a different swing arm, which came from the factory. From Ducati Course, the racing division, So we work quite closely with them, they're very good. We've got different linkage, we've got a slightly different engine spec this year, so we rolled that engine spec out with the last Alton test. So now we've settled on that spec, then we can prep our engines to that spec for everyone. So we're really pleased.
How many different specs are there? Like, how do you choose between them? Is it just characteristics? Or?
Yeah, characteristics of the engine really. So whether we want more power at the top end, so it's a really revvy bike. This is a revvy motorcycle, but it's more whether we want a smooth power delivery in the bottom end or what works where really.
So there's so many diameters there. You're talking about linkages, you're talking about swing arms, you're talking about like your front forks. Like, How easy is it to get? It must be so easy to get lost. There's so many different parameters that you're working with. Like.
Yeah. I mean, we'd have to, because of the limits we have, particularly this year, we can't go anywhere sunny and test. Then we have to do a lot of it on modelling software. So we have a piece of software, Zero Chassis, it's called 01, UK-based company, and they help us measure. So when we get a new link or a new swing arm, we send that to 01. They then measure it very accurately, and then they can give us a model of that for us to model. So we can say, if we were to raise the rear ride height, how would it affect the fork angle, for example? If we were to raise the whole bike, what the angle of the swing arm. From experience and from these simulations, we can work out what we think will give Tommy the characteristic that he wants. The strength we've got, particularly this year, is that we're a motorbike shop. So all the guys, at least half the people that work in the motorbike shop, work in the race team as well. So
wow.
we kind of, it's so ingrained in what we do. Joe is Tommy's number one mechanic on the chassis, and he's now doing a multi-strada service for a guy in the week. And then at the weekends, he works on Tommy's bike.
So when you come back from a race weekend, what do you do to this? Like, it'll come back completely whole. What do you have to do to it? Yeah, hopefully.
Usually it comes back in one piece, and but we have a whole schedule of things. Every part of the bike has to be checked and done. Most of the time, Superbike teams will strip the bike down to bare nuts and bolts, check everything, rebuild it, and we keep an accurate log of every nut and bolt of the bike to say what's the kilometre limit, what's the mileage limit on that bike.
So how accurate is that? So just say he goes out and does an extra warm-up lap or an extra out lap. Does that, you then have to change the whole thing for every nut and bolt?
No, but we keep a good guide on it. Yeah, so it's fairly easy to do. Every part's serial numbered on the bike, so we know exactly what's what, and then we can just say that part does that part does that. So everything from throttle bodies and engines to yokes and swing arms. And
just say you've got your standard engine there. What's the wear and tear on one of these things? Like, what are you looking at for, say, your forks, your engine, your swing arm, even your sprockets? Like, do you go through them quite regularly? Yeah.
I mean, things like some consumable parts that it's going to sound bizarre because we're used to dealing with motorcycles where you'd say, I'll get 10,000 miles out of chain and sprockets, but the lightweight race chains that we use and the abuse that they get, we get about 500 kilometres out of a chain and then we change it. In terms of stress on the bike, in a weekend we might use 15 or 16 rear tyres. So if you compared that to your road bike and you say every 15 tyres you've got to put a chain on it, you think, well, that's reasonable, sounds about right. So it all adds up, just that we condense it all into a weekend.
Jesus. So
there's a lot of effort.
That's crazy.
But we measure stress with the log data as well, and it's quite interesting. An engine for Tommy, if Tommy's using a race engine, at 2,200 kilometres, we'll change the engine. But for a road bike guy, we've had guys that have done 7,000 or 8,000 kilometres and all we've done is change the oil and no problems. Because they just don't have they're just not abusing the bike as they would if they're a professional rider on a professional track.
So you mentioned you've got like your K-Tech forks, they look pretty trick. I presume they're sort of special superbike ones that money can't sort of buy for the regular people?
They are actually, because they're leased from K-Tech, so they're you can't buy them.
Yeah.
Even we can't buy them. So we have a contract with K-Tech and they get the forks back at the end of the year. So
that exhaust, that Termi exhaust, that looks proper trick.
Terminoni have been a really good partner for us for a couple of years now, and we had with our new engine spec, we had a particular request or requirement from the exhaust system. So that was quite late to the party this year. We actually had all our exhausts delivered before the end of the year because of all the Brexit stuff. We wanted to get all our material in. So we got all our material in, and then we found that actually we need to make a change on this. So we had to speak to Terminoni only a couple of weeks ago. They managed to make new parts for us. And
surely if you're changing that and like if you're putting in like the new, like you've got like a special subframe on that, like the more you look at it, the trickier it looks. Like even looking at the handlebars, like even that little fun brake assembly and stuff looks lovely. Like how much time and effort has to go into just making everything fit perfectly, because everything's bespoke and from different places.
We have a great relationship with the factory, so we have material updates coming from the factory all the time. When Scott tests his bike and he says this works, that works, this doesn't work, we speak to those technical guys in that team as well. So there's a lot of sort of fall down information from there where it saves us a lot of money in buying stuff, trying it to find it doesn't work when they've already found it doesn't work. Our experience of factory support with Ducati is that Ducati have a racing division based at the factory in Bologna, which most other manufacturers don't. So they have actually in their motorcycle factory have a racing division where there's MotoGP bikes. We get to go down there, see some pretty cool stuff.
Is it nice inside?
Really cool, yeah. We go and see the world's superbike guys and we see all the procedures and systems and everything they do. So we've been getting that data from them. But, you know, Baz, who builds our engines, can speak to Maurizio at the factory who builds their engines and say, you know, I'm going to do this bit. So there's a really nice sort of personal link there. And you build some friendships. It's good. It's how it works, really. But we can get information. It's quite nice that I can text people who are very senior in Ducati course now and they'll reply with an answer. Whereas I don't think you can do that in many Japanese factories.
How much time does it take even just to strip one of these things? Like, are they easy to work on? Like, he must know it inside out.
Yeah. I mean, they can. If you even all the BSB teams at BSB Superbike level, you see a big crash and the bikes are rebuilt in a couple of hours. It still amazes me how they do it. You know, when the bike comes back here, the guys will know exactly what's going on. This year's tough because we've got a very, very condensed season. We've got 33 races, 11 rounds, 3 back-to-back rounds. So we have to be very careful about how, even we plan time off for the guys, they have to make sure they get a day off, otherwise they're tired and mistakes happen. So we have to plan everything really carefully. Most teams would use one engine, take it out, replace the parts that need replacing, the sort of consumable parts if you like, and then put it back into circulation. You might not use it as a race engine, but you might use it on a Friday or even a test day. Yeah. Whereas this year there's no time to do that. We literally don't have time to strip the bikes apart, take the engines apart. So this year it adds a little bit of cost in that we have to have all our engines built, prep done. We've got a row of engines here that are all scheduled now to be used, and the last one's just being put together now. So,
put together.
Yeah, so we build the engines here.
So it just comes nut and bolt?
Yeah, we don't get complete engines from the factory. We don't start with a road bike engine. We have a complete list that turns up in a box. And yeah, so the engine has to be completely assembled and then put it in a bike. Then we'll go and run it in on the dyno. Then we'll check it, check the power of it, check any unique mapping properties of that engine, save all that as a file. So when the engine goes back in, we can reload it. Then the engine comes out and goes into circulation. And then the guys get an engine plan, which I work out, that says that session use that engine, that session that engine, and all through the season.
Do you do any development at all during the year? Or like, will it be difficult?
Honestly, no. Once we start racing, we start racing. That's why we're really concentrating on all winter, getting everything right. The testing this year has been good. We've lost a couple of days to rain, but Tommy isn't a big fan of homework. So testing. This year we've had loads of time. So Kat, who's our chassis engineer, Kat and I have been working on all the different setup options we could have, what's most likely that's going to work for him, and then we try that out. So when we went testing, it was, okay, Tommy, go out on this bike and do 20 laps and then come back in, and almost don't really need to know what he thinks of it. It's just a first, right, get the data off the bike, get an outline from what he says, then try something else. And he would come in and say, right, don't like that, don't like that, don't like that. And we have to say, well, we don't care about that. We're testing something else. And so that's difficult for any rider because he just wants to go out and like just bite the screen and do some laps.
You must get so much feedback from the data. Could you set the bike up for Tommy without Tommy really telling you much?
Honestly, no. I think people have asked that before, and you can look at it. In fact, when we had John Hopkins riding for us, we didn't get very much feedback from John at all. He just came in and went, just check the numbers, man. If it looks good for you, it's good for me. And it was like that, unless there was something really wrong, he just wanted to ride it. But other riders just want to go through every inch of the track on a debrief. And Tommy's a bit of both. He'll come in and just shout about all the things that are really bad, and then which is his job, that's what he has to do. I think it's the variables always make racing really difficult. So the biggest variable is you don't know how fast everyone else is going to go. We've got a bit of an idea, but everyone's fast this year. Everyone's like being hungry for it. They've all been into it. There's a real buzz about the championship this year that there's going to be a good few guys out there that are right up the front, and hopefully we're one of them. At
the end of this year, if we were standing here, like, where would you want to? I know you're going to say you want to win it. Where do you think is?
Honestly, I think for the position we're in, I think we're really strong. So I think we can be battling with everybody for wins and for winning and for going for the championship. That's our plan. If we were outside of the top 5, I wouldn't be happy. So
mega. That's
where we're going to be. But it's so close. I mean, the level at BSB Superbike is, what we're doing, I'm sure everyone else is doing. No one's got a real edge over it. We're looking for every little bit. And sometimes you find it.
Well, thank you very much and good luck. And hopefully at the end of the year, you'll have a big smile on your face.
Yeah, if not, we can delete this, can't we?